Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, John and I are continuing our conversation about strongholds. We're going to be looking at the rogue. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are talking about rogue strongholds today. We have done a long series so far for several weeks looking at strongholds from each of the different classes, specifying how you would build your stronghold for your player character, how you'd build them for an NPC, and then how you look at strongholds for the antagonist specifically. Today, again, we're going to be looking at the rogue strongholds, which can be very complex. John, why don't you get us started here in this conversation?
Sure. So we've had this caveat before, but I'm going to throw this out again because I'm going to constantly refer to the rogue as a thief. I can't get that out of my brain. I still call it a thief. So we've been talking about the types, right? The type of stronghold that you generally find for specific classes, and we kind of have our own little list that we go through that makes sense so that we can categorize it and kind of fit them into a niche so that we can talk about how do you develop a stronghold, what is it going to look like, that type of thing. So for the rogue, the big ones are probably going to be mercantile or residences, I think most of the time, and these usually are going to be acting as a front for whatever guild. You know, they're going to have a thieves guild, but the front for whatever they're using is usually something along the lines of either a mercantile or a residence of some kind. That is not to say that you could not use any other type. You could definitely have, you know, if you have some kind of casting rogue, they might have an archetype that fits into the arcane. If there are a particularly religious style rogue, they may have a religious style stronghold, and it's the front for the thieves guild, especially if they're in favor of some kind of trickery deity of some kind, that type of thing. So any of those actually fit, but I think most of the time you find that, you know, classic playhouse or shop or something else like that is sitting as the front, and then the thieves guild gets run in the back.
Mm-hmm. So on top of that, I imagine you would also potentially look at some corruption elements that are going to be going into the guild as well, but these are just essentially hidden or built maybe underneath ground. Like immediately my mind goes to our typical things that we see within video game lore, whether it's in Skyrim or even in like Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amn, where you have these rogue guilds that have a lot of different elements, like, you know, their black markets or their brothels or these secret tunnels or slave quarters and so on and so forth, that reflect kind of the business that they're in and what it is that they're trying to generate money or do something within the city that's illegal of nature.
Right, so you have those elements, but those are generally things that are brought, like the core of the stronghold is whatever the structure is. So they
Gotcha.
And then the other elements that you're talking about, the corruption elements, having a black market or having slave trade or having any number of things that they would add into that type of establishment would be hidden. It's the same idea as like you walk into the meat shop in order to buy yourself a steak sandwich or something like that. But if you order it with a specific kind of mustard, then that means you can go into the back room and access the brothel or the casino or whatever it happens to be. But the core of the establishment is usually whatever is the front for it.
Now, we've talked a little bit before about how important it is for the GM to know their player character, to know what type of what their backstory is, what type of stronghold they'd want to build. Because as you start to structure this for that player character, it's really going to depend on where their interests lie at, where they've kind of made their specific skills set in. You know, are they smugglers? Are they spies? Are they assassins? What are they wanting to potentially focus on in the growth of this stronghold to enhance their skills? And maybe there's even the case of where they're wanting to hire on special followers to engage in other activities that they're not so skilled in. But you're going to have to sit down and have just a really like straightforward conversation about how much attention you're going to put in all these roguish activities in that stronghold. Are you trying to cover the full gambit of them, or are you wanting to just leave, or you're just wanting to focus on a couple of them?
Yeah, and you and I have talked about doing a full series on Thieves Guild. You're running a campaign or running a game that is, you know, specific to a Thieves Guild. So I'm going to reference a bunch of things that probably are going to come in that later series. But some of the things that you can consider just in terms of that, and you kind of hit on a few of these, is the type of thieves guild that it is. Is it a black market thieves guild? Mm-hmm. Do they specialize in trading illegal goods and services, which may include things like slaves, depending on the rules and the campaign setting, things like that? Is it going to be a spy ring? Are they primarily interested in gathering information and selling information? Are they what do I want to call it? Explorers Guild. Are they interested in finding ruins and then exploring them with their particular skill sets? Are they good at doing those types of things? And then are they? Are they an assassins guild? Are they killing people in order to get profit from it? And then are they just a trading company? Which it could be the case that they are kind of an above ground, legit style trading company that doesn't necessarily deal with illegal goods, but as a thieves guild, they're very good at that mercantile aspect of it in order to protect their assets.
And these can be a lot of fun to build. We've done a variety of them in our years of playing tabletop role-playing games, and one of my favorite ones that I did was back in the city of Hawkhurst, where I had an individual that was running a spy ring more or less, but they did things specific to like loan sharking, racketeering, looking at extortion, and then of course forging documents. And it was a little bit different than how you see most rogue guilds put together, because the activities they engaged in didn't really function around things like assassins and thievery and things that we would typically associate with rogues. It was a more like considered prestigious type of rogue guild that only engaged in like these other types of activities that was really, I think it was complicated for the characters to pick up on that's what they were doing, because it didn't have just like that staple activities of what you would see from rogues most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably a good point. So some of what you're talking about, I really want to dive into more in the NPC section where we're talking about questing, because those are all important pieces, the types of illegal activities that you can engage in when you're dealing with a thieves guild. But in terms of like the actual guild, I think that it's important that we also talk about what it takes to establish, create, and run a thieves guild if you're talking about an NPC, or talking about a PC player. So acquiring the thieves guild, we talked about this in a number of videos, where it is, how do you get to that point? Are they inheriting it from somebody, just in the sense that it's like they have worked their way up the ranks, they are second in command, and the guild master decides that they're going to retire, and the PC is able to take over that venue, a peaceful transition of power? Is it a situation where there is a war between various guilds, and they decide that they're going to eliminate the guild master or members, the high-ranking members of a certain guild, and then they're going to take control over that? It may be a situation where, and I always think about Baldur's Gate in this, where you have multiple smaller guilds run throughout a city or a region, and you have the actual guild master, and so the PC ends up being able to run one of those guild branches somewhere else within the city or within the region. And then there's obviously just creating a new one. You go into a region where there is no guild. It's a burgeoning city. There's random thieves running here and there, and the PC decides that they're going to go in and consolidate power, create their own guild, and draw all of the individually operating thieves into their domains so that they can use them for whatever purposes that they want to.
Yeah, I don't know what else I have to actually add on that specifically in terms of like the player character getting the guilds, because I think all those are great avenues to get to that place where they're then able to take control. It's just then at that point managing the guild. Right. Because as we're talking about, there's so many different activities and elements that go into Thieves Guild specifically that seem just, I think at first glance, kind of, what's what I'm looking for? They're God, what's the word? Give it to me, John.
There's a lot of words, Joshua. I don't know which one you want.
It's intimidating. It's intimidating.
Yes, it's intimidating.
Yeah, that's the word. Like literally, there's so many things that go into Thieves Guild in terms of the activities that can present themselves that you're intimidated on like how to balance it. And I know as a player character, when I have had a Thieves Guild, because I love playing rogues, trying to keep track of all of my different individuals, all the NPCs that work underneath me, and the activities that they're engaging in, and the money that's flowing in and the money that's flowing out can feel very overwhelming.
Right. So when a few years ago when we were running the Beck Me campaign, we referenced this campaign a lot, and I think it was a lot of fun. But one of the players in our group had acquired a thieves guild, and so I created a spreadsheet so that she could run her thieves guild, and just some of the things that we're talking about in terms of running a thieves guild. And you can expand this into other strongholds, but because it was specific to that, this is something that I put together for it. I had leadership roles. So there was the guild master, who was the PC. She had lieutenants. She had a master assassin, master enforcer, master thief, master fence. She had spy master. She had task masters. She had various allies that she could call on. She also had to track her income, the loyalty of the thieves that she had underneath her, which I think is particularly important when you're talking about a thieves guild, because you can have defectors, you can have people trying to steal from you. You're in a thieves guild, so there's definitely that loyalty piece. There was the reach of the guild. So how far out could they expand? Was it just a small town? Were they going into neighboring towns? Were they trying to go into the big cities? And then the visibility. And the visibility, what I mean by that is, how aware were the authorities of the guild's activities? So were they doing a lot of assassinations and all this other stuff that's going to draw a bunch of heat, where the local guard are going to try and shut them down? Or were they kind of staying below radar so that they're able to operate independently without a whole lot of heat? And the way that I measured that was basically like those more risky things that they were doing. We're going to give them more money and give them more reach and more prestige. But the more that they did them, then the more visibility that they got overall. So something to consider when you're talking about the things that your PC should pay attention to and you as a GM should pay attention to when you're running a thieves guild for a player.
And the only way that you'll ever effectively do this to perfection is if you have past real life experience in running an underground syndicate of crime. Yeah.
Highly recommended.
It's just so much that goes into it. It becomes very challenging.
Which, again, these are all things to one degree or another that can be incorporated into any stronghold. How loyal are the people that are in your fighter stronghold? How much reach do you have? What is your resource pool like? What's your armies like? You can really get into details like that if you want to. You can kind of, and we talked about this in our intro video where we talked about how just kind of like blanket do you want to run this, where everything is nice and smooth and you don't really get into the details, or do you want to get into the nitty gritty with every single aspect of the guild? And that's really up to you. But I think it's useful to think about those smaller pieces and draw them in if there is something you're interested in.
Yeah, and again, when I think we mentioned this in our intro video too, depending on how much into the weeds you get into some of these details determines the type of game that you're playing.
Right.
And this is for many reasons why you see players not get their characters a stronghold until later levels, when the course of the game kind of moves out into a different aspect, where maybe you're playing like tier 3, tier 4 type of gameplay at this point, and it's completely just changed the scope of where the game is and where your focuses are at.
100%. So now getting back into what you were talking about a little bit ago in terms of NPC questing, I think that's the very interesting part. When do you start doing quests for Thieves Guild? Number one, obviously, you have thieves in the party who are interested in joining a guild and get tasks to do. And some of the things that you brought up in terms of, burglary, extortion, robbery, any number of things that fall into that venue are definitely options for questing that you could do. If the members of the party or the PC thief that is in the group is interested in doing those things, any of those are options. It's basically going, okay, so your task for today is I want you to go out and beg for money. Simple as that. It's not, you just have to make sure that you aren't begging in an area where you're going to get in trouble. And so long as you're doing that, then you're bringing in money to the guild. You bring in money to the guild, and you're successful. Probably not the most exciting thing, but I could definitely see it being a social quest where you're trying to draw people in and see how much money that you can get from random passerbys. It could be fun.
I just love the idea of going out and begging for money, because even though some areas of town may reject that, no, you usually don't think of that as being like a thieves guild activity, because
Right.
you don't think of yourself as like breaking a law or breaking a rule, and it's like the most menial task you could be given, to just be sit out and ask people for money. You're not even taking anything. But one of the things that I do
feel like
love,
the easiest way to rob someone is for somebody to just give you what it is
Yeah.
that you want.
it's
for free.
easier than robbing you is just asking you for it.
Yeah.
But I will say that the thing that I think that brings Thieves Guilds into play so often with NTTRPG settings is because they are so intertwined in all of these activities and all these quests that you do. There's such a web of activity where one thing always leads to another thing, and because of the nature of corruption that oftentimes fits within this scheme of good versus bad, there's always something more that you can do with every quest. You can just completely continuously build that quest line with them.
Right.
Where you see that, robbing somebody leads to having to lie about something, that leads you to forging something, which then leads to assassinating somebody. Like, there's always an interconnection between all of these activities.
It always leads to murder.
It always does. And you see your characters just continuously being pushed down that web to engage in something more. And so it's very attractive to the GM to run these types of settings with a guild that is just continuously pushing out quests, because it's never ending. The danger in this, I think, is when it is centered around a rogue within the party, because then you have the rest of your party just kind of being pulled along on rogue quests 24/7, because they're never ending and they always appear to be time sensitive.
Right. The thing is that depending on how you set up the Thieves Guild, you can set them up as this information type thing. So it's like you may have a thief in the party, but it may not be the thief who wanted to actually engage at the Thieves Guild. It may be the wizard, because the wizard is looking for something, and the information is only attainable if you go and talk to the Thieves Guild. Because people in the Thieves Guild, they've got a spy ring, and they've got information pulling all over the place, or they're an explorers guild, so they're aware of this random artifact or this rare artifact that the wizard is looking for. So you have to be creative in intertwining this into the rest of the party so that it meets their interests and their expectations. Particularly if you're running for a good aligned party, which I think is oftentimes kind of what throws a wrench in this entire situation, is that you have a good aligned party, and you've got maybe a good or a neutral thief, and then you go in, it's like, oh, it's an assassin's guild. You can definitely throw the moral quandaries at people, but you can also run a thieves guild that is a trading company or an explorer society or something else that is not necessarily evil or in any way chaotic. They're simply providing a service, and because of the specific skill set that rogues have, they're very good at running these types of guilds.
Yeah. Yeah, I like those ideas, and looking at, essentially how they're doing expedition quests and things like that are a little bit more on the bright side of the situation.
They don't have to lead to murder.
They don't have. Well, they probably will. It is, TTRPG. It will lead to murder. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's true. So anyway, in terms of questing, I think that there's, like you said, it's almost endless, because a Thieves Guild is just kind of this beehive of activity. There's always something to be done. And there's always interconnectivity that exists. I think it works a lot, very similar to the religious style strongholds with NPCs, where when you start getting in good with one, then you start getting in good with the others, because then you're speaking the same language. You're going, oh, well, we don't have that information, but if you go and visit this guild in this other city, then you can acquire the information you need, and then you're moving the party forward, you're moving quests forward, you're moving the campaign forward, and you can do that because of the interconnectivity of this type of stronghold or guild.
So the other piece I want to make sure we talk about in terms of coming into an NPC stronghold is just making sure that it feels like a rogue stronghold or of some kind when you're stepping into that environment. It should look different than your religious strongholds. It should look different than your paladin or your knight or your fighter strongholds. When you're coming into it, you may see that, there's a different type of statues that you have up. Maybe it's the Lady of Death or something like that. Maybe it has a darker atmosphere, candles that are hanging from what the shit they're called, candelaras, that you have. Maybe there's patterns on the floor. You may have secret doors, traps that are set up in different ways, areas that are protected. Just a completely different feel when you're coming into that environment that's going to give you that sense that you're not in just any regular old place.
Right. I appreciate that you bring that up, because that's always something that it's kind of like the back of my list that eventually I get to when it comes to that feel. But I always end up with a lot of the mechanical pieces first, when it's like, oh, what's the hierarchy? What's the structure? And I get caught up on those pieces, and then I always have to come back and double check myself to make sure that I get the mood right for the particular location. So
I think some of it's just fun to do. I mean, just the fact that you can have a wall full of doors and only one of those doors actually opens to the hallway, and all the rest of them will just open up to a wall. Like, it's just like,
or a trap or
a trap or anything. Like, it's just the idea that you know that you're coming into a place that's tricksty in nature.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And one of the things that I did in one of the guilds that you guys, the guild that you actually took over in the Beckme campaign, was there were a series of traps that ran along the walls. Whenever they were invaded, there was this quote that they had, which is like, bow before the gold or something. I don't remember what it is. That's terrible and wasn't what I had it set. But basically the idea is all of the guild members knew that when they got invaded, they had to basically Naruto run around, because there were a bunch of scything blades that would come and chop your head off if you weren't running the correct way. And you can easily do those things where it's like affiliated members of the guild know the secrets of where the traps are located and know how it is to traverse that location. And if you are not somebody who is approved, then you're in trouble. You only run on the red flagon stones when you're running around the guild, because if you touch the blue ones or the yellow ones, then you're going to be hurt. You, like I said, you have to bow when you're running across past the certain statues. Otherwise, if you don't, then you're going to get a scythe blade that's going to chop your head off. They put in their safety things. They put in their traps to make sure that only those people who belong in the guild stay alive in the guild.
I just would like to be there on drill day when they're all Naruto running around in the room and none of the traps are going as they're practicing. All right, let's dive into the antagonist stronghold. When your NPCs are coming in to challenge the BBEG, maybe trying to overtake the stronghold to take it for themselves, or they're having to just defeat somebody, maybe that master guild master. Yeah, that works. That's in the stronghold. What are you looking at there, John?
Well, like I said, I think the big thing is that you have the trap stuff in place. And there's a couple of ways that you're looking at this. I mean, do you know the location of the Thieves Guild? Are you stumbling across this? Are you given access? Are you getting your way inside? That type of thing. Are you springing your attack from the inside, or are you springing it from the outside? Because I think that makes a big difference. But regardless, there should be traps in place, and the traps are meant to be a hindrance to invaders, not a hindrance to the occupants, not a hindrance to the members of the Thieves Guild. They should all be trained and know exactly where these are located, and they should know how to evade them effectively. They would know where all the secret passages are. They know how to maneuver around the guild house without being caught. And I think that setting this up effectively it can make for fun encounters. So, you walk in the front door. How do they handle an intruder who walks in the front door? Well, they seal these exits and they seal those exits, and then they provide a path because they want you to move or they want you to change. So they might create kill boxes, but they may allow you to go down one passageway, and then when you go down that one passageway, you find out that you can't go back the way you came. They want to split up your group as much as possible. So there's as many little tricks and traps and things that they can do to put you off kilter is what they do. And you've got to remember that thieves are not stupid. When it comes to this, they're cunning. That is the main thing that you have to remember about it, which is they're not going to build exit strategies if they can avoid them. They're going to try and corner you and eliminate you as best as possible.
And I'm going to share this idea. I have not done this yet, and I'm probably going to regret telling you this, John. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do is just have like emblems around the guild of like just eyes that are completely blackened out, and then have riddles all throughout the guild. Where it's like, because everyone that goes into a D&D game expects that the Thieves Guild is going to have riddles that you have to solve to avoid the trap. But I want that when the riddles are solved, it engages the trap. So when they think they got the right answer, or they thought they got the right answer, they think it was wrong, and so the trap triggered anyway. But it's actually just doing the actual riddle that continuously makes the trap go off. So
it's almost like the Naruto run thing, except they're like the thieves are walking around and just saying like the riddle is there, and they go banana because it's wrong, and they know that they can say that without tripping the trap as they walk by it.
Or the traps are just only triggered by the people that are coming through that don't know that you're just supposed to ignore the writing on the wall and just keep going on about your daily day.
Yeah.
Well,
and it may be an activation thing, too. It's like, oh, the Thieves Guild is being invaded. The traps are activated. You have to give the wrong password to be able to get the right password to be able to pass by. But the rest of the time, you just ignore them because the Thieves Guild isn't invaded.
Yep, that's fun. It's that type of cunning that I think is really important to set up, is knowing that those thieves should be that type of cunning. Like they know that you're going to go in and try to solve it, but really you're just giving the wrong answers because you shouldn't even be reading the words to begin with.
Right. So I think the last thing to hit on, because we knew this was going to be a long one because we get excited about things.
Lair actions, right?
Lair actions. We'll talk about those just a little bit here. I think some of the stuff that we've already been talking about is probably a lot of the same. There should be traps. There should be little things like that, especially if you're fighting the guild master in his lair or her lair. There's going to be colored stones all the way around the floor. And if you step on the wrong ones, then you're going to get hurt in some way. There are thieves that are at the guildmaster's beck and call that are going to come in whenever he calls for them, kind of in the same way that we talked about before. It's like he calls an assassin out of the shadows on initiative count 20, and the assassin gets an attack against somebody leaping out of the darkness like a shadow monk. I think that there's a number of ways to do that type of thing, and I think obscurity and illusion and those types of things are the friend of the guild, or friend of the thief. You're going to have fog clouds that spring up out of the ground, mists and smoke and steam, those things to obscure the battlefield so that they can benefit from that obscurement in some way, hide themselves, and to get themselves out of the line of sight of the wizard who wants to cast a fireball, or the fighter who's closed the space against them, so that they can get themselves into a better position to assassinate or sneak attack as best as possible.
And if you have your arcane rogues, there's also things that you can include there as well that have some magic aspects to it as well. For instance, I know one of the lair actions I had you guys fighting an arcane individual that had pools of water, and whenever you stepped in one of those little pools of water, it teleported you to another pool of water. And in one instance, you guys had a guy who never found his way back to the fight because he kept getting stepping in the wrong pool, and it kept sending him to somewhere else within the dungeon, which divides up the party and gives your BBEG that hand up in the fight, because if it's your tank or your major DPS that's gone during that course of the battle, it helps him win it. But yeah, I think that being very creative and clever in those traps and things that are happening within that room that are specific to that individual is very important. And I would centralize it around the master thief's like focus for that stronghold that you've built. Whether they're Well, I was thinking of like smuggler, burglar, assassin. Make sure that it fits like their interest.
Right. So an assassin's guild, the assassins are going to be jumping out of the shadows. A black market, he may have access to magic items or potions or something else like that you normally wouldn't find. I like that idea that the more that you're incorporating that, the better off you are. Or if you've got aspiring, maybe they just have really intimate knowledge of every member of the party, and they're exposing their weaknesses because the Spiring knows everything about them. They've been spying on them since they got close. So you can have a lot of fun, I think, with that type of encounter at the far end of it.
And you guys are probably thinking right now, but what do I do if my guild hall is a brothel? And I don't know. I don't have the answer for that one.
Distraction tactics. That's what you do.
That's
Distraction
right.
tactics.
Right. Don't look at the lady in red.
Yeah, everybody needs to make a wisdom save or they get distracted.
That's all I got, John.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then, like I've said in everyone, if you're giving lair actions to master thieves in their Stronghold, then make sure that you're giving it to the player too. I think it's a good option. I think it's a lot of fun, and you can get really creative with them, particularly with the specific PC, the archetype they've chosen, and the type of thieves guild that they're choosing to run. Make it individual to that player, and it'll be something special to remember.
All right. Well, if you guys are enjoying the content, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell ding so you know when our next video comes out. We usually have one coming out every Monday. At least for the last 2 years, we've been able to manage that. So stay around, hit the subscribe button. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Judge and Brew.